So, let's do it.
Good morning and welcome to another edition of Free Association Radio, presenting 15 Minutes of Flame with Robert Phoenix. Sometimes you just have to get into the radio voice. Thank you very much for your continued support and prolific energy, which I appreciate, and I hope to send that energy right back out to you. It's 9:02 in the sunny state of Texas. Austin, to be quite honest with you. It's not that sunny today. But on radio, everything's sunny on radio. Am I right? They say the sun always shines on TV. It always shines on radio. Because you wouldn't know any different, would you now? What's happening out there? This is Robert Phoenix coming to you live again for another edition of 15 Minutes of Flame. Well, before we start into today's festivities, they're not really festivities, of course. Trying to do here is get to the bottom of things. It's just reminding me of like a TV show from the 1950s, a cop show from the late 50s, early 60s. Dang it, Walker! We've got to get to the bottom of things! And what happens when you get to the bottom? It's a long way back up to the top. Speaking of getting to the bottom of things, one of the people in the 20th and 21st century that dedicated their life to getting to the bottom of things is Jim Marrs. And Jim passed away, I believe, yesterday, if I'm not mistaken. He'd been quite ill. He had a number of conditions that I think ganged up on him all at once. And there was a rumor a couple months ago that he had died. And of course, it wasn't true yet. He was on Jeff Rentz. He was a frequent contributor and associate. What was that? Of Jeff Rentz. So he's gone. Jim Marrs passed away. And he was. I thought Jim Marrs had credibility. And he was tireless. I mean, he was on radio show after radio show, and the internet was really good to Jim Marrs, I think. And he wrote about everything from the Illuminati to ET, UFO, to the Kennedy assassination. He was considered to be one. In fact, that's where he really cut his teeth, was on the Kennedy assassination and the grand conspiracy of the Kennedy assassination. So, Jim, you've got all the answers now, hopefully. Would it be great in some ways? I mean, if you could. Like, I know they have, there's plenty of stories and accounts of NDEs and people going to the other side and feeling the warmth, the light, the people that they know, and some of them have not been pleasant. Especially if somebody's trying to off themselves. It's a pretty cruel and despicable environment that they find themselves in. And when they come back, I think they have been disabused of any notion of ending their life anytime soon on their own accord. I think they got the message. But would it be interesting if you had an NDE and you came and you went there, and instead of seeing Grandma and Grandpa and Buffy, your dog, and all those things, and your own little life script, would it be cool if you got some answers? Like some real answers. Like all of a sudden this book opens up and you get to see everything, the truth behind the illusion here on Planet Matrix. And you come back. And you've got it. But then, if you put it out there, would anybody believe you? That's the other piece. Perhaps not. Anyway, just a thought. Just a thought. We're going to get into our version of competing truths today. And this is going to involve a little bit of astrology. Hey, how about that? I know a lot of you out there like astrology, so I'm going to bring some in today. It's enthusiastic applause and response to astrology. So, Jupiter in Libra came about last September, and it's going to move out in October. So we have a few more months of Jupiter in Libra. And when Jupiter was in Virgo, I was very clear about kind of what the effects of Jupiter in Virgo would be. Of course, I'm a Virgo, so I understand it. And I talked about it often, and it was pretty much sort of in alignment with that aspect. And so when Jupiter in Libra was coming around, I was thinking, okay, this could be really good in a lot of ways. Like we could bring, expand the balance between the masculine and the feminine, because that's what the scales do, right? On the one hand, you've got the masculine. On the one hand, you've got the feminine. On the one hand, you've got truth. On the other hand, you've got illusion. On the one hand, you've got justice. On the other hand, you have criminality. It's all those kind of opposites trying to balance each other out. So I thought, okay, this could be really good for the masculine and the feminine, and that we might actually be able to come together and have one stable plane of operation. And that on the feminine side, they could say, you know what? We've been really hard on you guys. We've been really hard on you guys. And maybe some of the hardness has been part of a program that we've actually taken in. And you know what? That program hasn't made us any better or nicer or kinder or more compassionate. In fact, it's kind of made us a bit harder. And maybe we could back off of that a little bit. And on the other side, the guys say, you know what? We've been derelict in our duty. We've abdicated our responsibility of being men, real men, men who protect people that they love, men who have a sense of duty and obligation to not just the family, but the sanctity and the safety of the world at large. And we've abdicated that for a long-term run in adolescence. And so both sides could come together, and they could say, "Guess what? Let's give this another shot." We've both been through cycles of death and rebirth, and feeling as if whatever it is that we've inherited hasn't been the thing that would give us the greatest benefit, nor the most soulful connection with ourselves or one another. Hey, what a novel concept! Has it happened? I'm not sure. It's asking an awful lot to occur in a year. We're talking decades and decades and decades of open and covert sex and identity warfare. So it's not going to change overnight. Very little is going to change overnight in our lifetime, unless, of course, it's the second coming or aliens or something so dramatic that we are living in one world and then we're living in another. Then it could change overnight. Other than that, change does not occur in that way. It's rather glacial, to be honest with you, although it does occur. So what's left with Jupiter and Libra if we're not kind of achieving that kind of status, at least in my mind? What I think the first part of Jupiter and Libra, especially the retrograde piece, which has been happening for a few months, of course it went direct about 3 or 4 weeks ago, is that it has expanded the imbalance between all these different areas. That's what Jupiter does. It expands. So it's expanded the imbalance. So we look at things and we see things and say, wow, this is not good. Look at this, look at this, look at this. And we just step back and we go, geez, how are we ever going to change this? Because, both sides are throbbing and pulsating with their own sense of immediacy and need, right? So that part's been difficult. However, now that Jupiter's direct, maybe we're going to see something different. Maybe this sense of justice, equally meted out in two separate paths, might actually manifest and come to fruition. And maybe that could be the best thing that could happen to us. So you may ask yourself, well, what is he talking about? Well, I'm talking about two separate tracks of quote-unquote conspiracy and injustice that are swirling around us right now. On the surface, I can't think of any other time that I've been alive where I've seen front burner issues that can take down almost the entire political system as we know it right now. We're going to get into some of that today. And hopefully I can do it in about 20 minutes or 25 minutes. If it's a little bit longer, you know how that goes. But before I do, I just want to bring up this interesting little factoid. Did you know that Al Gore's home uses 34 times more electricity than the average household? Yeah. I don't know where to begin with this, except that Al Gore's a fraud. He's been a fraud for years. Years. His payback for laying down and letting George Bush become president of the United States was to become the Green Pope. He was going to have an Academy Award-winning film. He'd be tied to climate change and the environment and all these goodies. And he would be propped up on the shoulders of environmentalists and environmental scientists. He'd be a prophet. What's better than being a president? A prophet. Because a prophet and his message, if it is widespread and ringing, lives on longer, far longer than that of, say, James Garfield. You know what I'm saying? So that was his deal. That was his deal. And it was all based on pretty much junk science. Now we've got all the geoengineering, which is completely changing the planet and its weather, and we're having climate change thanks to the United States Army and Air Force and NASA and any other agency that I don't know of who skulks around behind the scenes in the dark. Anyway, Al Gore uses 34 times more electricity than the average U.S. household, and this is from a website called The Political Insider. Here's the scoop. This is the Daily Caller, also known as the DC. It shows that Al Gore's home consumes 34 times more electricity than the average American household. This is from them. In just this past year, Gore burned through enough energy to power the typical American household for more than 21 years. Think about that. You're living in a typical American household. You would not have to pay another power bill for 21 years based on Gore's consumption. And this is from the National Center for Public Policy Research. The former vice president consumed 230,889 kilowatt hours at his Nashville residence, which includes his home, pool, driveway, entry gate, electricity meters, etc., etc. A typical family uses 10,812 kilowatts of electricity per year, according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration. Here it gets worse. Last September alone, Gore devoured 30,993 kilowatts of electricity. That's enough to power 34 average American homes for 1 month. Over the last 12 months, Gore used more electricity just heating his outdoor swimming pool than 6 typical homes use in 1 year. How about that? There you go. I just wanted to drop a little trivia, little data into your head. All right, let's get into what I'm talking about here, which is the dual track of competing scandals. So, Seymour Hersh just came up, and Seymour Hersh is pretty, you know, look, Seymour Hersh is one of these guys. He's on the left, but he's not adverse to the truth. You know, Seymour Hersh was the guy that said Iraq didn't have any,
My wife got
cake.
me to be a devoted vegetarian.
What is this? Hold on. What is this?
Except for every lady's night.
Only Glad has force flex to prevent rips,
What
leaks,
is
and
this
punctures.
shit?
So whatever you throw in the bag stays in the bag. Be happy, it's Glad.
Oh, shit. You know what? I've got this on a...
My wife got me to
up.
be a devoted vegetarian. Except for every lady's night.
Only Glad has force flex to prevent rips,
Hold on.
leaks, and punctures. So whatever you throw in the bag stays in the bag. Be happy, it's Glad.
There we go. Sorry for that. You know, when I go to a website, they have these... This is the new thing with they embed videos now on the website. And so best thing to do if you're on a website that has... normally I have ad blocker, but I'm using two computers, and I don't have a ad blocker on my second computer. So if you go to these websites that have, well, like say Zero Hedge, and it's really just a print deal, put your volume down. Okay, so Seymour Hersh basically is a guy that is not necessarily afraid of the truth. Now, I don't know if he's a plant. I don't know if he's a CIA guy, a mole. Who knows what with people anymore in these positions. I mean, you can't take anything at face value anymore. You just can't. But let's assume for the moment that Seymour Hersh is legitimate. That he's one of these guys that tends to be a voice of reason and not afraid of the truth. And like I said, he outed that Iraq didn't have any yellow cake or rods or any of that stuff. And when you remember back in the day when they were doing the inspection through Iraq, and it was the International Nuclear Commission. I forget the name, but they kept coming back and saying, "There's nothing here. There's nothing here. There's no nuclear capability in Iraq." And Hersh was part of that. He was on the tour with these guys. And there was nothing. And of course, they didn't give a shit. It's like, let's just get in there. And let's take the oil, let's take the resources, and let's take any kind of high art or secret technology that they've got holed up in Babylon, and we'll plunder it. Anyway, this is what Hersh has come up with here. And this is from Zero Hedge. It says, Seymour Hersh has now presented a narrative from his investigation of how the whole thing began, including who actually is behind Russiagate, lies, and why they are spreading these lies. In a YouTube video uploaded August 1st, he reveals his inside FBI and Washington, D.C. Police Department sources long before the Justice Department Special Counsel Robert Mueller will be presenting his official findings to the nation, that the charges that Russia had anything to do with the leaks from the DNC and Hillary Clinton's campaign to WikiLeaks, that those charges spread by the press were a CIA planted lie, and that WikiLeaks had gotten only leaks, including at least from the murdered DNC staffer Seth Rich. I still have my doubts that he was murdered. And were not from any outsider, including the Russians, but that Rich didn't get killed for that, but was instead shot in the back during a brutal robbery. Okay, if you want to go with that narrative, I don't believe that the Russians had anything to do with the WikiLeaks dump. They didn't. Now, that said, so we have that going on. That's one part of this. Okay. That said, do they have something on Trump and the Russians? And the answer is yes. But it doesn't have anything to do with WikiLeaks and the tampering of the election. Okay, so let's be clear about that. So if that's the case, then what do they have on Trump? Well, I'm going to introduce you to a man by the name of Felix Sater. Now, I had stumbled upon Felix Sater about 6 months ago And he is a deep insider, or was a deep insider in the Trump organization. He's a Russian Jewish emigre, his right-hand man, involved in a number of transactions and a number of Trump real estate ventures, some of which went belly up and have some very dubious ties, economic ties to, of all places, Russia. Now, what you're going to find out here is that if you do any research, that Russia, once the wall fell, and once communism ceased as an entity, Russia became this no man's land where there was a huge economic grab. There were resources, there was money, there were deeds, there were all kinds of things that were basically plundered during that time. And the West was involved with some of that plundering, but a lot of that plundering was taking place internally in Russia. And this is where we have the rise of the oligarchs. Because remember, under the rule of communism, theoretically, it was the state that held the resources, which were managed by bureaus, politburos, so that the people could then avail themselves of the resources and participate in the programs and the work programs of the state that supported those programs, right? So how do you get 200 billionaires since 1991 in Russia? 200 billionaires. 48 of them happen to be these oligarchs. People like Roman Abramovich and Mikhail Prokhorov. And they're very much connected to Vladimir Putin. And they're very much connected to an organization called Chabad Lubavitcher. So, who is connected to Chabad Lubavitch? Jared Kushner. He's been kind of an avowed supporter in his family for years. And these are the people that have been engaged in the transference of money under many different guises in Russia. So it's basically a syndicate. It's what it is. So there's a huge amount of money that gets moved into the private sector in Russia after the fall of the wall, and it becomes a land grab. Everybody remembers Yukos and what happened to Yukos, which was state-run, state-sponsored, and how it got bought for pennies on the dollar and all that stuff. So where did all that money go? How did it get spent? Who was involved? Well, I can tell you right now that if you were somebody doing business in the United States and you sensed that there was capital about ready to get drained out of the Soviet coffers, you'd want your fingers in that pie. You'd want a piece of it. Because if you weren't, guess what? Somebody else, your competitor, somebody else would get it. And we all know in business that the maxim is, well, if I don't do it, somebody else will. And it could mean the end of your financial empire and hegemony. So you don't want to let anybody get over on you, right? That's how it goes. That's how these people operate. There's no sense of conscience. There's no sense of morality. And if there is, it's all just a bunch of bullshit. So let's go back to Trump. Trump is somebody who's involved with Russian money. And it goes back to Felix Sater, who has been connected to Russian mafia. He ran Trump's company called Bayrock. And it's a developer who funded the Manhattan Trump brand condo hotel project. And they got the money from Kazakhstan, apparently. And Putin's cash from banks in Iceland. Felix Sater made headlines recently by sending extortion threats to some of Trump's former partners from Kazakhstan over the Soho deal. Okay. Now, Sater has agreed to cooperate with an international investigation into the alleged money laundering network. 5 people with knowledge of the matter said the cooperation has included working with a team of lawyers and private investigators pursuing civil cases across 3 continents. The people said Mr. Sater declined to comment. Felix Sater, Russian-born dealmaker with organized crime connections who worked, by the way, this is called the sternfacts.com if you want to look at this website, who worked on property ventures including Trump's Soho in Manhattan, has attracted attention in recent months as efforts continue to chart the links between the U.S. president's circle and money men from Russia and its neighbors. It is unclear how much money has flowed from the alleged Kazakh laundering scheme to Mr. Trump. Title deeds and banking records showed that in April 2013, shell companies controlled by the Krapunovs, an unfortunate last name, spent $3.1 million buying 3 luxury apartments in Trump Soho from a holding company in which Mr. Trump held a stake. Mr. Trump's Kazakh connection also adds to the emerging picture of the president's enigmatic relationship with the former Soviet Union. Questions about that relationship have dominated the early months of his presidency as multiple investigations examined claims his campaign colluded with Russian attempts to manipulate the 2016 presidential election. Private lawyers working on the case claim foreign investors may have used their profits from corruption to buy multiple units in Trump's most conspicuously failed project in New York City. For criminal prosecution, Trump settled one of the lawsuits in 2011, and the New York Times revealed that fear to be well-founded. Okay, we'll take the New York Times with a grain of salt. In fact, the president's lawyer demanded that disgruntled consumers promise to stop cooperating with prosecutors to get paid, as they reported last year. And hovering over it all was a criminal investigation previously unreported by the Manhattan District Attorney into whether the fraud alleged by the condo buyers broke any laws, according to documents and interviews with 5 people familiar with it. Trump gave Bayrock an arrangement to sell his real estate brand around the world, according to Forbes, including a proposed but never materialized Trump Tower in Moscow. Trump is so terrified of talking about his involvement with Felix Sater that he lied in a sworn deposition, swearing that he wouldn't even recognize the Russian immigrant. Felix Sater spent a decade working as an informant for the FBI while working with Trump at Trump Tower after being convicted of a felony in secret, this is on his own, for participating in a $40 million Wall Street pump and dump penny stock scam with the Italian mafia. So they had Sater basically implanted in the Trump organization. And they had him because he was playing with funny money on Wall Street. More recently, Sater was caught in a bizarre diplomatic back-channel operation to Russia with Trump's personal lawyer, Michael D. Cohen, who himself recently hired a criminal defense lawyer. Sater's plan to work with the now-fired National Security Advisor, General Flynn, fell apart, and last month he became the first high-ranking member of Trump's inner circle, thought to become a cooperating witness against the president. So, if you want to follow more of this, look up Felix Sater, and you'll find that there are some very unsavory links with this character, and he was very much involved in the Trump organization. So what we have is basically somebody who's profited handsomely off of deals and money that needed to get out of Moscow through Kazakhstan and through Iceland. Okay, so that's one track we've got going. That has nothing to do with the fact that Russia tampered with the elections. That's a smokescreen. And Mueller has been looking into, of course, Trump's finances with his family. So this stuff could come up, conceivably. Am I right? I'm right. But what else is going on here? Well, what else is going on is Mueller's got his own piece in all of this. The Clintons were involved in uranium deals with Putin, Uranium One. Mueller was kind of a bagman at one point in time. So I think what we're dealing with, and we're going to get into the Wasserman Schulz stuff too, because that's another part of this track, is we're dealing with, and this gets back to Jupiter and Libra, we're dealing with simultaneous sort of tracks of what we would call justice and truth, both on the right and both on the left. And it's becoming expansive. We're beginning to see this stuff. And if people were really on top of it, if they could get off their predisposition on the right or the left, what they would see if they got above it is they would see a massively corrupt system in which both sides participate, both sides are in it for their own gain, both sides are willing to do just about whatever it takes, including murder, to prop up their position and continue on with their version of reality, which has very little to do with ours. And this Jupiter in Libra is starting to bring this to the surface. And so one side is not more righteous than the other. One side does not have a stake or a claim in some form of truth or veracity. That they're, what's the word I'm looking for? That they can't be zealous. They can't claim the high ground. Neither side could claim the high ground here. They're both equally contemptible in a lot of ways, and they're both equally corrupt, and they're both equally at fault. If you go back and you look at George Bush's dealings before he became president, if we had the same kind of scrutiny and the same kind of internet tools, and we knew about George Bush before he became president, I guarantee you, or after he became president, I guarantee you there would be a different kind of narrative around that presidency. And of course, once 9/11 happened, he was untouchable. Because he was the president that had to deal with 9/11. He was untouchable. And then we had Obama, and clearly there is all kinds of holes in Obama's story, but nobody wanted to deal with Obama in that way because he was the first black president. And if you went after Obama and all the gaps in his history and the fact that his records were sealed and he was the editor of the Law Review and he never wrote a single piece, and then his relationship with Tony Rezko in Chicago and Rezko's money laundering and the real estate deals and Donald Young and all the other stuff that goes along with the mythos of Barack Obama, none of it really could be brought up because he was sacrosanct. You had to leave him alone for fear of being labeled a racist or a hater or a bigot. Here comes Trump, and he doesn't have the same kind of cover. He doesn't have the same kind of flak jacket that Obama or George Bush had. It's not happening. Now, do they want him out of the way because he's a rebel, he's a nationalist, he has these ideas that he wants to make America great again? Or do they want him out because he knows so much? And it's all tied to Trump in a lot of ways. All the dirty deals could be just tangentially related. Is that why they want him out? So let's get into the Wasserman Schulz stuff. Let's get in here. Here's your other track, your other truth track. This is from a guy by the name of Jay Dillinger. So this is the Awan brothers. And he's going to get into some of the George Webb stuff here. It says the three Awan brothers named by Webb, Imran, Jamal, and Abid. A fourth brother and wife of one of the Awans are also believed to be involved. Originally installed in congressional positions by Greg Meeks, who is widely regarded as the most corrupt member of Congress. He says, I will preface this discussion by stating you will find some variation in the numbers cited. I believe that is because I quoted from stories as the case was developing. The Daily Caller was the primary source for most of the news on the net. I tried to be as accurate as possible with the facts quoting the sources I found. I am posting this because I want answers. It is not a definitive work. I do, however, believe that the breach is every bit as consequential as the Hillary email server and the CIA WikiLeak. It says, why isn't the MSM interested in the Awan brothers, the three IT specialists fired for rooting through the White House, the House Democrats' sensitive files? Who are the Awan brothers that hacked, and why won't the media cover the story? So here we go. The first anomalous fact is the media. Why have they largely ignored the issue? Before you cyber trolls jump on me, I would like you to consider two facts. Congress deals with very sensitive classified material all the time. The Awan brothers could never have had a secret clearance for any other group than Congress. So why is there no news story? The second error is the smoking gun. The evidence is always covered up with a coincidence, a cover story. He says, while I believe the politicos in D.C. are pampered rubes, they do have a good support staff, and some have been trained to support clandestine operations. The rest have been hammered with political optics for the entirety of their career in D.C. They are all trained to control optics and the dissemination of the truth. So why hasn't the media made this the top news story to at least go along with the Russian hack? Let's face it, the media doesn't care about the damage to the country. They only care about their partisan agenda. If they didn't, they would cover stories damaging to the DNC. With a $600 million CIA contract, would you think the Washington Post could afford an investigative journalist or two? Perhaps CNN will take up an interest as this rabbit hole runs deep and wide. So I'm trying to get to the smoking gun. Here we go. Let's find this here. I'm looking at numbers. Just trying to find the numbers. Okay, here we go. So Imran-Awan bullied Central IT to bend the rules for him so there wouldn't be a paper trail about the unusually high permissions he was requesting. And their actions were not logged, so members have no way of knowing what information they may have been taken, the Central IT employee said. This is a Central IT employee, so he's a whistleblower. After obtaining access to the Capitol server system, the Awan brothers could control all aspects of a congressman's system. They sold and configured the hardware, setting permissions and remote access to maintain the devices remotely. Essentially, the keys to the kingdom. Through congressional requests, they managed to completely compromise the network. They could read email, transfer files, install applications, i.e. keyloggers. The latter reports that the systems and network were completely compromised. Beyond that, Imran had bypassed IT keyloggers and reporting systems by gaining remote access directly to congressional computers. So we have the House hacking suspects could read every email dozens of congressmen sent and received. The Central IT staffer said that any suggestion that the brothers' access didn't span the full gamut of congressional intrigue was silly because they were the ones giving out permissions. The problem is that once they bypassed internal security, there was also no logging of their actions. House authorities set their sights on the possibility that a remote server had been used to transfer files off congressional members' computers. The investigation revealed that Imran had been stealing money, equipment, and overcharging for services in total for almost 10 years, and almost 80 Democrat members of Congress were compromised. So instead of turning the case over to the FBI, it was turned over to the USC police. They're investigating the theft, not the data breach. So the USCP, our investigation of the theft of the equipment and loss of the congressional data. Congressional IT staff are under investigation in the procurement scam, alleged procurement scam, at the request of members of Congress. The United States Capitol Police, that's the USPC, are investigating the actions of House IT support staff. This is from some guy named Malecki. In a statement, no members are being investigated, no arrests have been made. It should be noted that administratively House staff workers were asked to update their security settings as a best practice. Wow. So the Awan brothers managed to get access to the Dems committee computers just by asking for passwords. In addition, the Awan brothers sold the Congress outrageously priced equipment and broke into members of Congress offices to steal equipment and or data. So what I want to know is who's behind the Awans. How did they get the training to do this? Did they just go to school? Did they find it online? Who was behind the Awans? That is the $64,000 question. Apparently, they were paid over $4 million by the Democrats, the people that they serviced over the 10-year period. So they hacked Pelosi and Hillary, and there's Wasserman Schulz, who won't speak with anybody. Jackie Spears from California. So this is a huge scandal. I mean, this scandal could absolutely ruin the Democratic Party. So we've got this happening, and then we have the Trump scandal happening, and they're all happening simultaneously, both on the right and on the left. I mean, this is huge stuff. Now, will it result in some kind of cleanse, some kind of purge? In a perfect world, it actually would. But we live in an imperfect world. And we've been seeing this for many, 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 many years. But it's interesting. What we've never seen is we've never seen anything at this magnitude, at this level. Now, when Jupiter goes into Scorpio in October, what will it expand upon at that time? Power, money, greed, sex, the underworld. That stuff will come bubbling to the surface. Meanwhile, we'll have Uranus coming into Taurus next year. So, if I'm not mistaken, we'll have a Uranus-Jupiter opposition at some point in 2018. That'll be very, very interesting. Where we might get a sudden flash into this whole notion of egregious and excessive behavior and everything that goes along with it. Should be a very interesting time. But between now and then, we've got a lot of ground to cover. And we've got the Great American Eclipse coming up in just 18 days, folks. 18 days. And I don't think it's going to look good for Trump. I just don't. And this latest piece with sanctions on Russia, I mean, Russia knows what's going on. They know that Trump has to do this because they've got him by the balls. And it's basically Congress and the Senate right now that are running the United States. And if you look at what's been happening in the inner circle inside of Trump's world or the White House, McMaster is starting to pick off all the Trump loyalists. And McMaster is a major globalist. And I don't know anything about Kelly except that he worked for DynCorp, whom George Webb has been trying to expose for a while now. So Kelly's got some DynCorp connections, and there's some nasty stuff connected to DynCorp. So this is what's happening. This is the Jupiter-Libra aspect really coming to the surface. And Debbie Wasserman happens to be a Libra. Donald Trump happens to have Jupiter in Libra. Ivanka Trump, Jupiter in Libra. Jared Kushner, Jupiter in Libra. And these are the big players. Big players. Interesting stuff. And we're not done. We're not even close to done. The American eclipse. Just look. I don't want to oversell it. Like, oh, nothing happened. All these people. You have to understand. You have to understand that the eclipse energy will kick in roughly 10 days before the eclipse, and could have an effect 10 to 15 days after the eclipse. So we're talking roughly 3 to 4 weeks of activity, maybe over a month. What might be of more significance is the eclipse mania that'll happen on the eclipse line, when all these small little towns who are unprepared for a rush of people to be in the path of the eclipse for roughly about 5 minutes, and how they're going to handle it. Like little tiny St. Clair, Missouri, that could be another part of the story that should be quite interesting. But based on Trump's chart, and also because the eclipse will take place on Mike Pence's Pluto. Now think about that. Mike Pence's Pluto, his Pluto in, I believe he's got Pluto in Leo at 29, or Pluto in Virgo at 0. It's really close to Trump's ascendant. So this eclipse will take place almost right on Mike Pence's Pluto. And of course, who stands the most to profit? If Trump falls, it's going to be Mike Pence, Mr. Next in Line. The guy's a robot, total robot. Speaking of robots, I'm going to drop this in real quick. Did you see that that Facebook had these 2 AI bots that they had launched? And not long after they had launched these bots, they created their own language, and they were speaking in their own language that the people at Facebook could not understand. And so they had to shut them down. If that doesn't freak you out, I don't know what will. However, I will always leave you on a happy, pleasant, positive note as we dive into the belly of the beast and emerge whole. If perhaps a little wiser and maybe a little bit lighter as a result. So the wisdom or the thing that I can share with you today, if there's anything, is that we're witnessing something we've never seen before in the history, in the recent history of this planet. We've never seen anything like this. Never. At some point in time in the future, they'll talk about this time. They'll talk about this time as being one of the more pivotal times in the history of the planet. And you're right here, right now. You're on the front lines. And you don't always have to be just a witness. You can be a participant, not in the madness, but you can be a participant in understanding the type of world that you want to live in and who you want to live in that world with. And every day is a process of discernment and refinement. And we are getting tested all the time with that. Trust me. Discernment and refinement. Discerning and refining your choices. And your choices will ultimately determine the type of future that you and other people close to you will be living in. And that's just the bottom line. And when we have Jupiter and Libra, sometimes making a choice can be real difficult. But it can happen, and it does occur. So take solace in the fact that you're living in revolutionary times, yet you're witnessing a deconstruction phase because it has to. It has to. We have to go through a deconstruction phase so that at some point in time we can live in a system where the well water is clearer than it is now. It will never be perfect. Life on this planet was never meant to be perfect unless, of course, some golden prophecy from from a book occurs, right? Unless it all happens and we're living in the golden age. But then it's over. It'll be over. At least the world that we know will be over. But the world is never meant to be perfect. There'll never be a utopia. There'll never be a Shangri-La. There will always be some element that we will refine, like a pearl. And that's just the way it is. Whether it's inside us or whether it's striving to have a vision of a more perfect world. And, those visions are wonderful. We have something to strive towards, to attain. They often fall short, but the results of the falling short can be wonderful and can be really productive. So like I said, take solace in the fact that you're living in really interesting times, that you're not only a witness but a participant in this world and whatever world unfolds from it. And with that, you know the drill. Use your head to discern what's real, your heart to stay open to what's possible. I'm Robert Phoenix. I'll be back tomorrow with the Friday Farcast, and I'll have my my friend Christine Maynard on for half hour, 45 minutes or so. Christine has a novel that she just finished called Duped. And we'll get into that with her, and she's a delightful person and a really exceptional writer. She'll read some passages from her book. And anytime somebody I know works tirelessly to produce a book or form of art, I'm going to have them on the show. All right, here we go. A little hot second chakra. I'll see you guys tomorrow.
Okay, let's do it.